What's going on, guys? This is Rob. If you guys enjoy my content, make sure you hit the subscribe button and make sure you hit that little bell so you never miss out on my sexy voice. So after much anticipation, we are finally covering Deathstroke versus Batman in DC Rebirth. Deathstroke versus Batman is one of these things like Batman versus Superman. It's one of these things that a lot of people really like to debate, and this has been done before. But the cool thing is that the way Christopher Priest does this is actually different from what we've seen before. It invokes a lot of really great themes, and really one of the biggest questions to come out of DC Rebirth regarding the character of Damian Wayne. Now, one of the things to also bear in mind here when it comes to Christopher Priest, and this is something to be aware of going into his Deathstroke story, if you guys go out and buy the comics, is he doesn't tell them in a linear fashion, which is to say A, B, C, D. He tells them very much in like a kind of chaotic fashion to a degree, in the sense that he'll tell a part of the story, then you'll get a flashback, and then he'll tell more of the story, then he'll do a flashback for the first flashback, and then a flash forward, and it'll just kind of bounce around all over the place. Now, fortunately for us in this story, it's not nearly as complicated as the first arc from Deathstroke, but there are some things we can kind of skip over, and then some things we do need to include. But of course, this initially picks up with basically like a bank robbery, but there's an envelope that's been left here that was discovered by James Gordon that's for Bruce Wayne himself. And Bruce Wayne is just kind of like, okay. And so from there, he ends up tracking the guys down and basically says, look, like it has to be one of these perpetrators who left the envelope behind. Now, this is a very, very important thing, and it seems small, but it's very, very important. And the reason why is because for a lot of people who sit down and read Batman stories, one of the things that people have a tendency to do is to look at the character of Batman and see him as this kind of know-it-all. But the cool thing about this is that it goes into this idea that Batman doesn't have all the pieces. He's figuring out just like everybody else. And so where he takes these guys out, he basically brings out the envelope and says, tell me what's going on with this. Give me all the information you have on this thing. But what we end up doing is having him go through, look at the contents of this envelope, only for us to find out it comes from Biogen Labs, and it's a DNA test. It's a DNA and paternity test. And what this DNA and paternity test basically seems to indicate is that Batman is not the father of Damian Wayne. And this is kind of a big thing, because that's the whole basis behind Damian Wayne. Damian is the son of Bruce, that he was conceived, basically Batman was, violated more or less. I mean, whatever phrase YouTube needs in order to keep from demonetizing the video, because at this point everybody's walking on eggshells with YouTube. But basically Batman was violated by Talia al Ghul. He was forced into intercourse, or really kind of knocked out and then used, and then of course Damian Wayne was born sometime later. But the idea behind Damian has always been that he is the son of Bruce, and to have it thrown in there that this is not the case is actually a pretty big deal, because what he ends up doing is saying, okay, somebody has to know what's going on here, which leads him to tracking down Slade Wilson. Now, initially when he goes after him, it turns out it's a decoy, and then the real Slade Wilson is really just kind of around there. And that's why he basically jumps in and immediately goes to attack Slade and says, you have to be the one who knows what's going on. Somebody here has to have information, and I'm starting with you. And it's kind of cool, because where the two of them are sort of going at it, Slade Wilson has this AI called Billy, which really kind of powers his suit to a degree. And then of course, while that's going on, his suit's basically timing out and shutting down, which Batman uses the advantage of. And when the Batwing comes in, Slade Wilson in turn activates his own device that basically takes out the autopilot aspect of the Batwing. So it's really, really cool, because you're talking about guys that have like all these different variations, all these different abilities, and these tricks of the trade and things they can use to their own advantage. And so once it's all said and done, Slade Wilson kind of says, okay, look, we need to stop, and we need to figure out what in the heck is going on, like what is up with all this. And this is when Batman reveals to Slade Wilson, this DNA test not only says that I'm not the father of Damian Wayne, it says that you are. And this is the meat and potatoes of why he went after him, because what this test indicates is that Deathstroke is the father of Damian. And this is kind of a big deal. This is a pretty significant thing. Now, Slade really kind of chimes in and says, there's no way this is possible. And Batman's like, yeah, I know it's not, but we have to find out what's going on. But notice this, Batman wouldn't be chasing after Slade so hard if he didn't believe there was some possibility that it was true, that it could very well be true. And so in this moment, Batman kind of has this small reserve that Damian is the son of Slade, but Slade just kind of like knocks this off right off the bat. He's like, don't want to have anything to do with it. And that's kind of an important thing, because Batman picks up on that immediately, and so Batman's response to this is, fine, then we're shutting down Deathstroke, basically. Like every single contract you have, I will get in the way. I will slow it down. I will do everything I can. Every single person that you're going to go after, like I will move them out of your way, and I will make it impossible for you to make any money. And so it's kind of an interesting thing. We're not really told explicitly why Batman does this. And this is one of the things you're going to notice in this story. Christopher Priest just sort of takes liberties, and Batman just does things because. And one of the more notable instances, what you end up having is when Slade and his guy are heading back to wherever it is they're supposed to be going, they're plane is basically shot down by just somebody in the desert with a rocket launcher. And when Slade goes to attack this guy, when he goes to basically take him out, we end up finding out this person is Batman. The Batman shot down the jet of Slade Wilson. Now, at the outset, and this is one of the interesting things about this, at the outset, going and looking at like Twitter posts and looking at like Comic Vine posts and reviews and things like that, one of the big things people picked up on right off the bat is something like this is very much outside the wheelhouse of Batman. Batman doesn't shoot things down with a rocket launcher. It's just not what he does. It's not his normal thing. And Christopher Priest plays on this perfectly, because where we would look at that and we would say, well, that's ridiculous. Batman wouldn't do that. What ends up happening is when Deathstroke, basically goes to attack what we think is Bruce, he starts to beg for his life. That's something Batman never does. And then when Deathstroke unmasks him, it's just a normal guy. Now, at this point, we transition over to Kane Adeline, or I guess to Adeline Kane. This is the ex-wife of Slade. Now, for those of you guys who are curious about this, there were a lot of things that drove a wedge between the two. There were two people who never had any business getting together in the first place. And of course, the first story arc really explores a lot of that stuff. But she essentially works for Defiance, kind of like Defiance Incorporated, or like Defiance as a name. It's basically an intelligence operative that kind of operates outside the federal government, but is a contractor for the government. And so they have access to all kinds of information, different things like that. Bruce showing up here and asking questions to her is, what is going on here? You have to have, like, somebody has to have answers about this. What do you know about the whole idea of like Slade and the potential of him having a son, Damian, and so on and so forth? It's exactly as you would expect. And it's kind of cool because Batman's basically grasping at straws. Again, Batman always seems to kind of have it all figured out. And to put him in a position to where he not only doesn't have it all figured out, but he's trying to figure it out and really seems desperate in the process, it's not something you normally see, and it's kind of cool. And so in the midst of all this, somebody just kind of shows up to Slade Wilson in the desert. The two of them engage in a bit of a conflict, and then of course this person ends up defeating him, and we end up realizing this is Talia al Ghul. And she says, we need to have a conversation about your son. Basically, her hinting to the idea, we need to have a conversation about Damian. Now at this point, we transition over to Deathstroke, who's basically taking out a guy by the name of the Human Dynamo. Now the Human Dynamo as a concept was not created by Christopher Priest. That actually goes all the way back to Quality Comics, which I think was, I want to say Quality Comics was Famous Funnies. It's 1930s something comics, which eventually basically like that version of Human Dynamo was he was more silly and comedic than anything else. I think he originally made his debut in the police comic storylines as part of Quality Comics. And then eventually you got an Earth 2 version, who was Danford March. That's what it was. His name was originally Danford March. And he was an enemy of Hawkman. And then that goes into this version, Ace Masterson, who was basically created by Christopher Priest. So again, the concept of Human Dynamo has been around for a long time, but Ace Masterson was created by Priest for the Deathstroke story. And what this basically says is that he wears a kind of utility belt to harness his own energies, which allow him to do a wide array of different things to basically manipulate various forms of energy around him, like kinetic energy, potential energy, and radioactive energy, and all the different stuff. I mean, he was a Cold War era character, which is one of the ways that DC, well, at least post-crisis, after 1985, it was one of the ways that DC introduced characters that would normally have been part of like the Justice Society, but were not part of a different universe. Instead of saying that like they fought in a different reality, they just said they fought earlier than all the other superheroes, and then they retired by the time like Batman, Superman, Wonder Woman, by the time they all came along. So it's a pretty smart move to kind of invoke that thing. But we don't really know why it is that, Human Dynamo is being targeted by Deathstroke outside of the fact that a contract had to have been put out on him. But of course, Batman responds by saying, look, I told you I was going to stop every single thing you did. And we end up kind of flashing back for a second to this conversation that Batman has when he calls up Deathstroke and says, look, like Deathstroke is shut down. Like, so do not go and do your thing. Do not go on contracts or whatever. Every single person you go after or that you have existing contracts for that you haven't taken care of, I've moved to like witness protection. And Deathstroke's kind of, his response here is, yeah, because that's definitely going to stop me, Batman. Witness protection. Witness protection protects you from mobsters. It does not protect you from me. And dude, it's a cool moment. This leads, kind of jumping back to the fight between Batman and Deathstroke. The fight continues on exactly as you would expect, and it's pretty evenly matched. You're talking about very prodigious fighters. Now, of course, Deathstroke does have the upper hand on Bruce insofar as he has like enhanced strength and speed and, a healing factor and so on because of his experimentation. But Bruce Wayne also has like a myriad of fighting abilities plus his popularity. And so with his popularity, as we know, DC wouldn't let him lose. And so with that happening, we end up having like Human Dynamo who stops everything and basically says, look, because of the powers that I have, I'm immortal. Like I'm never going to die. The problem is that I'm getting older. And so as I'm getting older, what it means is that I'm losing my memory. I'm suffering from things. Well, at least it's hinted at he's suffering from like dementia, or at least having the early stages of dementia, having early stages of things like, like Alzheimer's or so on and so forth. But he's basically losing control of his mental and physical faculties. And what this means means is that with the power he possesses, if he lost control entirely, he could destroy the world. Now, something else Christopher Priest hits on too, which is kind of cool, is he actually he basically says Ace Masterson was part of a Cold War era group of superheroes called the Justice Experience. Now, they died like that. It's kind of cool because it's like a throwback to the Justice Society of America, and it's a cool little moment here. But what ends up happening is Batman responds by saying, like, I'm not going to let Deathstroke kill you, we're going to send you to Sanctuary. Now again, Sanctuary is kind of an important thing, where we have basically like the aftermath to the events of like Flash War and all this stuff, where it's basically DC hitting at this place that Sanctuary is the place heroes go when they suffer like a crisis of conscience. But it's basically where he's intending to get shuffled off to. The problem is that his powers interfere with the transporter. And so where it seems like the contract's still on, Deathstroke takes him out because that's the task he was assigned with. So again, it's kind of messed up here. But what we end up having is basically kind of interspliced over the course of the story so far. We had these things where we had like what really looked like Tim Drake sending a message, talking through messages and saying, look, like these are the things that I've discovered, and these are the things that are going on, but it's important that you understand who your real dad is. And this message that's being sent by Tim Drake is being watched by Damian Wayne. And so basically Damian's hearing it straight from the horse, or at least as close as he can from the horse's mouth from Tim Drake, that his father is in fact Deathstroke. And so it's just like all things hint to that being the case. And it's kind of wild. And so what we end up doing here is basically picking up with Damian Wayne, who meets with Deathstroke and then pledges his allegiance to Slade and refers to him as his father. Now, this again is another moment where Christopher Priest just sort of does things and doesn't really give us an explanation as to why. The idea that Damian would immediately betray Bruce Wayne and say like, well, the DNA test says it must be true, so let's just go with it and let's find out. It seems strange. At the end of the day, he's extremely loyal to Batman. And so with that in mind, you would have to believe that he would fight on the side of Bruce. Like he would do some poking around and investigating instead of just jumping in and believing that he's definitely the son of Deathstroke. Now, of course, this also coincides with the appearance of a character named Nightshade. Now, in reality, this event of Eve Eden showing up here is actually the first time she's appeared in DC Comics after DC rebooted it in 2011. And it kind of makes sense because she was never really a relevant character. I mean, she was like a C-list character at best, but she can do a wide array, or not really a wide array, but she can do a few different things that make her pretty dangerous. She can manipulate shadows. She can teleport people to the land of the Nightshades, which basically is like a place of where shadow kind of reigns supreme. She can invoke a little bit of magic here and there. She's not by any means one of DC's like most notable villains. She's peanuts. She's small time. She's just kind of here. Why it is that she gets into a fight with Slade, I don't really know. It's for a contract or something along those lines. But the important thing here is that she basically uses a bit of magic, casts a spell where Slade's suit protects him from the psychological effects of it. It does impact Damian, and Damian kind of like lashes out and basically starts, screaming, and he's like, there's no possible way you're my dad, and almost kind of seems to refer to his normal self. And then in turn, once Nightshade basically leaves, he goes off and he just kind of leaves and says, okay, like there's no way that you're my dad. And it's kind of a strange situation. But following this, we end up having, Bruce back in his house, and talking to Damian, a little bit about what's going on here. And where the two of them are sort of bickering back and forth, Bruce kind of makes this offhanded remark. When Damian kind of storms out, Bruce makes this offhanded remark. This needs to be settled. Like it needs to be taken care of, and everything needs to be put to an end. And this is when we find out Slade had basically invaded Wayne Manor. Now, this is an important thing because one of the indications here was that Slade did not know Bruce Wayne was Batman. And in fact, there's a point where a conversation goes on where Slade is speculating why it is that Batman even associates with Bruce Wayne in the first place, like what it is that's going on here. Now, of course, at this point, Slade really puts his mind to task, and this is really like showcasing how smart he is. It juxtaposes Deathstroke to Batman and says they are incredibly alike in terms of their intelligence. And the way this happens is there's a substance called molybdenum. I'm not sure exactly how you pronounce that, but basically saying like this bunker that Bruce Wayne is in at the moment, this place where he's basically hiding out, I guess what passes for Wayne Manor out here in the middle of nowhere, has been constructed by him, and it was designed for the purpose of looking like it had always been here. The ground was basically restored to its original appearance. Even the dirt that was originally there had been replaced or had been restored to make it look normal. But Slade had picked up on the fact that there is a substance in that dirt that was not there originally. Now, is it a MacGuffin? Absolutely. Does it work? Definitely. It's one of those things that you see a lot when it comes to comic books. But as comic book fans, if we like the story enough, we give it a pass. Like we're very hypocritical in that regard. I've been that way for years. We're just kind of like, hey, look, I really like the story, so we'll just kind of sweep that under the rug. We'll just kind of ignore that a little bit. But of course, this leads to Dick Grayson into Damian Wayne showing up here. Now, this is one of the other important things to bear in mind too. This takes place before Tim Drake comes back. So it takes place after the events of the Colony, which is to say Detective Comics Rebirth #1, or I guess Volume game 1, but before Tim Drake returns. In any event, it's basically Slade saying like, get them out of here. This is between you and me. Batman responds by saying, yep, this is you and me. And so once they actually get downstairs, the two of them just like start getting into a fight. Like Batman switches off the lights and the two of them just start fighting one another. And it's kind of a cool thing because Slade is basically trying to like figure out, like, I mean, he's still trying to figure out what's going on, but for the most part, it seems like he already has. He's just kind of playing along. But with the two of them fighting against each other like this, it's kind of intriguing because it's sort of like a knockdown, drag out fight. It's one of these things where it's like no one's really in danger. When Batman gets into a fight with like Superman, or Batman gets into a fight with like Wonder Woman, like he did in Hecate and she beat the hell out of him. Like when it's something like that, Batman fights the person he's fighting, but also concerns himself with like everybody around him, trying to make sure that like nobody gets hurt. Whereas here, it's just him and Slade. They're not powerful enough that they're gonna like bring the foundation down or anything like that, so they can just have like this sort of knockdown, drag out fight, and they do. It's like the fight scene from They Live, where you have like Roddy Piper and the one guy that did the Navy commercials back in the day. No, he didn't do the Navy commercials. The one guy who did like those voices and stuff, and they just beat the crap out of each other in an alley. There's no music, no nothing. It's put on the glasses, put them on. Dude, I love that movie. I love They Live. That fight scene is so incredibly amazing. But still, when they basically begin to come to, when Batman wakes up, he just like punches Slade Wilson. And the two of them start fighting again. It's pretty cool. It's a pretty awesome little fight here. Now, of course, this second little battle lasts for like a minute and a half, and the two of them basically, end up coming out even. And with Batman being as injured as he is, with Slade Wilson recovering from his injuries, the two of them basically have to work together. Now, this is grudging. It's not something they really want to do, but it does kind of work. Because right now you've got the FBI raiding the compound of Wayne Manor, because of what Deathstroke and everybody else did, in terms of, sticking everything out there. But it's kind of a cool thing because Slade and Batman have kind of like this mutual respect because they've both paid their dues. They've earned themselves, they've earned their current places in the DC universe. And so there's a respect that comes in there. They don't really like each other, but they respect each other. And that is the important thing. Now, from here, we switch back about several years before, and we end up finding out who it was that sent this envelope. And what we end up learning is that right almost immediately after Damian Wayne showed up, that what Tim Drake had done was perform a paternity test. Tim Drake had done a DNA test on Damian and basically said like, does Bruce Wayne know Damian's not his son? And so like where Alfred's like, well, it was never really my question to ask. It's not my job to, I support Master Wayne or Master Bruce and whatever it is he ends up doing. We end up finding out that Tim Drake was the one who took the DNA test, he put it in the envelope and he sent it off so that it would be recovered by Bruce at some point in the future. And so it's like, Tim Drake was the one who set all this in motion. Tim Drake was the one who started all of this. And so in the middle of all this, when Wayne Manor's being raided by the FBI and so on and so forth, the son of Deathstroke, of course, Icon, who has some mind control powers to a degree, takes over the mind of an FBI agent, sends him back to Wayne Manor and basically tells everybody else, I'm the special agent in charge. This is done. Let's go. Court order basically says like, we're finished here. Everybody get out of here. But with the two of them, making their way back, and getting themselves back to rights, Damian Wayne shows up believing that Deathstroke had killed Batman because Deathstroke said he's dead. Damian doesn't really get into a fight with him at all. It's basically like, hey, take this, get out of here, grab your dad, get out of here. Like I'm leaving, nurse him back to health. He needs it because at the end of the day, I'm Deathstroke. I've got a healing factor. And where people will say who would win in a fight between Batman and Deathstroke, the evidence is right here. Deathstroke standing, Batman is not, i.e. Deathstroke wins. Like it's a cool little thing. Now, of course, this leads directly to Adeline Kane showing back up into like this meeting of sorts, and then Deathstroke standing there and basically saying, look, like, why did you switch the DNA samples? Like, why did you switch the DNA tests? And her response is, I don't know what you're talking about. I'm not the one who put out false information telling you that Damian Wayne is not your son. And so that's what we end up finding out. This is actually Bruce Wayne in a Deathstroke mask. The real Slade went to go meet with Talia al Ghul, and he's the one that figured it out. That Talia al Ghul was the one who switched the test because she's the only one that really had anything to gain by it. That while his ex-wife is vindictive and while she does hate Slade, there's nothing to be gained here. Like it wouldn't destroy Slade's life. This impacts Batman. It doesn't impact Slade. So from there, when we kind of figure out what's going on, Talia basically says like, I wanted you to see what the world could be like, what we could be like together if we were to work together and combine our resources. But as always, Slade's a one-man band. It's basically him just sort of doing his own thing solo. And so what we end up doing is transitioning back to Wayne Manor, and we end up having the actual DNA test, an actual test that was done by Bruce and Alfred to verify who the father of Damian Wayne is. And of course, as we expected, we end up finding out it is definitively Bruce, that Bruce Wayne is the father of Damian. But it is a cool thing. It is a cool little story. I mean, throwing Bruce's fatherhood into question, it's a pretty nice little thing here. But let me know what you guys think. Anyway, we're going to bring this video to an end. If you are new here to Comics Explained, make sure you guys hit the sub button to become part of the Rob Corps. If you guys enjoyed this video, make sure you drop a like. And yeah, I will catch you all later. Peace.